Hello, and welcome to our Design Salon on Storytelling today. I'm Vasa Giannopoulos, Acting Deputy Director of Education at Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Today's program is part of our National Design Month festivities. I want to thank you all for joining us, and a massive thanks to Target for making National Design Month possible. Earlier this month, we shared the stories of our 2020 National Design Award winners during our virtual awards announcement. They are amazing storytellers themselves, and we're so excited to hear more about the stories they tell through their work today. Congratulations again to Scott Dadich and Emily Gobeille and Theo Watson of Design.io. Before the conversation begins, Scott, Emily, and Theo will share a little about their work. Throughout the program, we invite you to share your own stories and engage with each other in the chat. At the end of the hour, we'll take your questions, and you can add those to the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as possible. I'm so delighted now to introduce our moderator, Michael Ellsworth, co-founder and principal of the design practice Civilization, our 2018 National Design Award winner for communication design. Based in Seattle, Michael is also the executive director of the Design Lecture Series and Non-Breaking Space Gallery. For the last 20 years, Michael has focused on creating impactful work for social causes and cultural organizations, elevating their critical stories to new audiences. Michael, thank you so much for being here today. Over to you.
Thank you, Vasa. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to the Cooper Hewitt for all the incredible things that you do for our design community. I'm really happy and fortunate to have this opportunity to chat with these great design minds that we have with us today in the comfort of my home in Seattle. So as Vasa said, today we have Emily and Theo of Design.io and Scott Dadich of Godfrey Dadich Partners, and we'll be discussing the role that storytelling plays in the work and hopefully a lot more. So all right, let's get into it. I'd love to start by having you all share your stories and some of your work. And take us on your personal journey. How do we start with Emily and Theo?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Gobeille.
And I'm Theo Watson, and we are Design.io. We like making immersive interactive installations, experimental tools for data visualization, and we also really enjoy exploring new forms of storytelling. We also recently made a video game for the first time, which is a game that's meant to teach children about computational thinking within environmental science. And we're a pretty small team. It's just 4 of us. We're based in Petaluma, just north of San Francisco.
And Theo and I met when we were studying at the Parsons School of Design in a program called Design and Technology. And there I was focusing on children's media and thinking about ways that interactivity could be used to enhance storytelling and learning, like in a way that it wouldn't disrupt the flow of the narrative, but it really felt seamless.
And I was learning about computer vision and algorithmic animation from Zach Lieberman, kind of working on very early versions of open frameworks, as well as my thesis project, which was a spatial audio experience where you could leave sounds floating in space. After Parsons, we moved to the Netherlands, and I was working with the Graffiti Research Lab on a tool called Laser Tag, where you could use a laser pointer to write graffiti across a building, which was quite a lot of fun.
And in 2007, we were approached by this amazing children's festival in Amsterdam called Cinekid. And every year they have a media lab that goes along with the festival, and they asked us to come up with a project for it. So we started thinking about the things that we loved to do when we were children, like playing in the forest and routing water at the beach. And we came up with this idea of an immersive space where children could create trees that would take the shape of their bodies. And then they could use physical logs to route digital water to the trees to keep them alive. And then based on how moist or dry the forest is, you get a different kind of cast of creatures that inhabit it. We really like to create systems that support open play. So experiences that aren't reward-based or directive, where really the choice is all in the visitor.
And with these sort of systems, we see like, different personalities, different ages gravitating towards different things. And so, young children might really be fascinated with the floor. And like, there was one girl I remember who just wanted to sort of manage everybody. And like, so she was telling the tree people where to make trees, and she was telling the people managing the water how to get the water. But like, everyone kind of comes in and gives themselves a role. And then they almost dissolve that role and come up with a new role. And so it's like this very organic process of just sort of seamlessly shifting between roles and objectives.
And also we've discovered that people enjoy creating their own kind of games within these spaces.
A project that we did afterwards, kind of based on Funky Forest, is Connected Worlds. This was at the New York Hall of Science in Queens, and it's still running at the moment. And this was for a space called the Great Hall, which is a huge space. But we kind of saw this space, and immediately, like, the first thing we thought of was like a giant waterfall. And then we started to think about maybe, instead of Funky Forest, which was just one ecosystem, could we kind of have a whole bunch of connected ecosystems that all share the same water supply? And the kind of theme of this exhibit was to sort of get children to think about sustainability from a systems thinking perspective, where like their actions have impacts both kind of local but also global. And so this idea of these like 6 different kind of biomes that were all kind of connected with a single source of water was really kind of like a key way to get them to understand these sort of trade-offs and negotiation. So here is just, you can kind of see how big the floor area is, and the water kind of moves around the space, and you can push it into different ecosystems and into the water table on the walls. And then these are some of the different ecosystems, like the jungle, the desert. And these are pretty fantastical. They're kind of allegorical as opposed to literal. The light plains, and then this is the wetlands. And every creature sort of has a relationship with one of the plants or the kind of flora in the ecosystem. So this is the wongu bird who calls for the shower plant to wash it clean when it gets dirty. And these are really like some of the games we love, like the kind of open play where what we're really doing is building a set in a way, and or a system, and we're letting children discover and explore it, and then also make their own stories on top of it. This boy had been desperately trying to get the rock rollers out of the river because they block the river when they go in it, but the rock rollers really like to stay cool, so they keep coming back. And so he for like 20 minutes, his job was just to keep the river flowing. And it was sort of this tireless job, but he was having so much fun doing it. And then sometimes we come into the space and we're completely surprised. And so here, all these kids have decided to work together to stop any water leaving the environment. So they've taken all the logs and they've negotiated amongst themselves that they're going to build a giant dam at the end of the experience to keep the water in.
And Weatherworlds is another kind of immersive space, but slightly different. In 2009, we developed a project called Knee Deep, also for the Cinekid Festival, that allowed children to see themselves just kind of from the waist down. And the idea is that they're kind of stomping through this loose narrative where they start at the scale of a molecule and then end up being like giants standing on top of the moon. And immediately, of course, kids sat down because they wanted to see their entire bodies. So we always knew we wanted to make another version that was a, full height green screen experience. So with Weatherworlds, we like this idea of like having weather superpowers where you could conjure a storm and shoot lightning from your fingertips.
And with this one, we had 4 different kind of environments, but your actions actually determine the weather. And so you could go from the desert to a lush landscape, or to a rainstorm based on kind of how you manipulated the clouds, which you grew in the palm of your hand and pushed up into the sky.
What was really interesting with this project, it was one of the first times that we really saw a wide range of ages actually playing together, like adults and children engaged and played together who didn't know each other. And there was something about seeing yourself looking at a screen and not looking directly at that person that sort of made it feel okay and safe and comfortable for people.
Yeah, we kept thinking like, oh, that guy and that young girl, that's her family. And we'd turn out they'd be complete strangers, but they were playing together. Here you see these kids hacking our ice block system by joining their hands into a giant ice block that takes over the screen. So in this one, there isn't any purpose. Like a lot of our installations, there's no goal. The goal is just to sort of explore, tease it out, and kind of make your own stories. So I think that's a brief introduction. Hopefully we kept it tight.
Oh, that was wonderful, and I want to hear more, and I really want to go experience those in real life one day. They're amazing work. I want to turn it over to Scott. I would love for you to share your journey with us and your work.
Absolutely, and thanks for having me. And awesome to be with Emily and Theo. I love your work. It's so cool. I have a strange background, and I'm not quite sure how I got into design. I always had a really strong affection for creativity, but was good at math and science when I was in school. And my guidance counselors sort of steered me into an engineering path. And I discovered pretty quickly into college that I really was bored and tired of doing calculus problems all night in mechanical engineering school. So I actually dropped out of the first university I went to and was actually working at a bagel shop with a buddy of mine, my roommate. And I was on the early morning shift, coming in at 3 a.m. to bake bagels every day and sort of figure out what I was going to do and figure out what my career path and schooling path was going to be. And one day the owner of the bagel shop asked me if I knew anyone to paint a sign, the menu boards for the sign. And she said she was going to hire somebody. And I said, well, whoever you're going to hire, I'll do it for half of the cost that they're going to do it. So I stayed up all night and lettered all the menu boards in the bagel shop. And the next day, one of our regular customers came in and commented on the new menu boards. And it was an art director at a communications firm named Sonia Yek. And Sonia is amazing designer. And she came back and gave me her business card. And she said, I started as a sign painter. And if you want to get an internship at my communications firm, you should come and see me. And I had no idea that design and art direction, graphic design was actually even a career path, let alone a great job. So I went to see Sonia, and she did see kindly on me and gave me an internship where my first job was actually to set classified ads in the local newspaper. So those little 3-line classified ads, I would just obsess over all the little details and type choices and kerning each letter form exactly so. And I fell in love with that pretty quickly, and got some coaching to move, and went to Texas Tech University and switched my major into design communications, and really from there on out fell in love with the field and the challenges that it provided. And right after school was introduced to DJ Stout, who was the art director of Texas Monthly, who invited me to come down and learn what it was like to make a magazine like Texas Monthly, which is just a wonderful world. And very shortly after graduating, I was lucky enough to get a job there as art director, and then eventually creative director. And I spent almost 7 years at Texas Monthly working under an amazing editor named Evan Smith, who taught me how to write and edit and put together a magazine at that scale and complexity. And it was just a masterclass in storytelling and journalism and craft, and getting to have that constraint of having a thing to make every month, and then it goes to the printer and you start all over again and get to try out a bunch of new ideas, new story formats, and pull it all together with the tools of graphic design. And from there, I went out west to where I am now in the Bay Area, and worked at a magazine called Wired, where I was the creative director for 5 years. During that time, I got to work across all those different forms and formats, and I'll just share my screen here. Putting together those different ideas and formats, and really getting to play and experiment with an amazing team of leaders and journalists there. So through the years, we got to tell stories really at the intersection between technology and culture, and mystery stories, and stories about the way the world works, using infographics and all the luscious tools of print, neon inks and other. And from there, actually went into working in the digital realm and invented the Wired app and partnered with a team at Adobe to bring together digital magazines across not only Wired, but then the New Yorker and Condé Nast. And that led into some work on the iPhone. Also have had the great fortune of working with a host of collaborators, including in print books like this one with Dan Winters, and then came back to Wired actually as editor-in-chief in 2012, and got to work again with an amazing team of editors thinking about how story shapes not only the print edition, but the digital tools that we had, the live events, the retail events. Even got to work closely with President Obama in 2016 as he became the first sitting president to guest edit a major magazine. So that was a thrill of a lifetime. And during that course of time as editor-in-chief of Wired, I also came up with an idea that ultimately became Abstract, the Art of Design, the Netflix series. I was extraordinarily fortunate to partner with two incredible filmmakers, a guy named Dave O'Connor and the Academy Award winning filmmaker, Morgan Neville. And together we sought to create this idea that we could tell stories about design, and through our own natural curiosity that we have about the process of design, the decisions that come together to make a design, and profile some of the most renowned creatives, creators, designers, and artists working across a host of different fields all around the planet. And to do that, we really wanted to think very carefully about who we were going to choose, that these leaders must compel us. We would want to be able to spend an hour with them and really understand their stories as we sought to understand their creative process. We wanted to have some narrative stakes there, that not only, things don't always go as planned, and sometimes we need to understand that failure is part of the creative process. We wanted to be able to see what these creatives did and connect them with the subcultures of design that really matter so much to us all, and that I found so much curiosity in over the years. We wanted to find diverse creators from different fields and different backgrounds and different geographies, and tell their stories and find the common threads that exist between the different fields of design. And we wanted all those creators to be active in the world today and actually solving problems at scale, not looking back at their career in retrospect. So that's really what we sought to do. And to make a season of Abstract, it takes literally hundreds of people to do that, and is an investigative process. It really relies on the standards and tools of journalism, whether that's introductory interviews and late nights of research, and then getting out into the field to produce and shoot, and getting to use beautiful tools like anamorphic prime lenses that really helped us in our goal to seek to design every frame of the show and create something beautiful at every turn. Even if we were in an office building, that we could actually make the storytelling front and center and allow the voices of the creators to match with equally beautiful footage. And that also veered into the world of pulling my background in magazine design into the world of documentary film, that we could go in and design all those frames and design infographics and graphics that would help explain the concepts that these creators were exploring. One of the moments that I'm most proud of in the show is what we call Saul Bass moments, little ideas where a creator or a journalist or someone is trying to explain a fairly abstract concept. And sometimes those concepts, I know as creatives, we all think of things in different ways and we all imagine things in our mind's eye. What we wanted to do is actually create a film process where we could show and describe the creative unlocks and put them into a context that would be conveyed with really simple shapes and graphics. This is one where the journalist Robbie Gonzalez is actually talking about and explaining the tools of user interface and user experience. And I'll just play this real quick.
Those are just the visual and physical elements that a person interacts with when using a device. UX stands for user experience, and that is literally the experience a person has while using a user interface. Those feelings can be emotions like happiness,
So we got to pull all of that together into these beautiful graphics. I had a whole team to get to work on this, and abstract has been one of the thrills of my life, to get to make all of these creative decisions with so many brilliant leaders, filmmakers, composers, musicians, architects. And I always love to show this. You talk about, we talk about creative decision making in form of story. This is actually the timeline of the Ian Spalter episode, the episode that I directed in the series. Every little sliver there is a decision, a sound effect, a graphic, a shot, an overlay, a piece of typography. And you think about the thousands of contributions from all those people who team up to make abstract, and it's an enormous sense of pride to be able to share that with you all today. So that is my background.
Wow, incredible. I know there's a lot of fans of abstract in the audience, and I am as well. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for all your amazing work. And what an inspiring story. I'm also a college dropout and worked at a newspaper, so not but yeah, there's all different ways to get to what we do. Yeah, thank you both. Let's get into it. Emily and Theo, wow, you create these beautiful immersive interactive installations that free the interface from behind the glass and allow the audience to be part of the experience. And Scott, your career has spanned print, web, mobile, film, and is distributed through these powerful and wide-reaching platforms. I just want to start and bring it down into this. How do you find the core of the story that you want to tell? And how does the format affect that?
I think for us, it often starts with oh, wouldn't it be cool if, and just some kind of a dream idea that we have. And that's usually like a starting off point.
Yeah, usually in some ways it can often start with a visual. Some of our projects, like someone comes to us and they'll say, we need you to explain sustainability to children age 3 through 13. And then you're like, okay, wow. And other times it's just there's no brief, and we just kind of have this idea that we've sort of been obsessing about, that it's almost like a daydream, and you want to bring it into the world. So sometimes it's, we have a lot of constraints, and other times we have very, very little constraint.
I was taught very early on by DJ Stout, who's now a Pentagram partner. And when DJ was at Texas Monthly, he had explained this concept that had sort of governed his work at the magazine, which I still love, and I think has strangely rubbed off on a lot of the work I've been able to do. And that is the idea of the variations on a rectangle. And he saw the challenge of designing a magazine every month as just, you have this viewport, you have this rectangle, and you need to tell stories in that rectangle. And I kind of love the elegance of that over the years. And looking back in the good fortune that I've been able to have experiences in digital and in film, it's just that rectangle starts to move. And we think about the rectangle of the viewport in the camera and how we move that camera through space and through time. And I think that's been one of the common threads that's helped me align my thinking and my creative collaborations through those different media platforms.
I love that concept. And speaking of that viewport, in your work, Scott, you have the character inside of that rectangle. And in Design IOs, I feel like the character's put inside of the rectangle.
You stepped into that space, and it's wrapping around you.
Exactly. Does character, what role does that play in your work?
I think it's a big part of it. It's how we're communicating information. It's how visitors come to discover how the system works by watching a character's behavior and analyzing what it's doing and interacting with it, and that sort of back and forth and following this chain of discovery is how they kind of really get the core of what's going on in some of the systems that we build.
One of the things we sort of discovered with Connected Worlds was that the stranger the creatures looked and the characters are, the more that children would sort of pay attention to them, sort of interrogate them almost, to try and kind of understand. Like, the more kind of uncomfortable we made the children with the characters, they didn't just acknowledge them, it really incited a lot of curiosity. And so we realized that actually, you know, kind of making sure that we stay in this sort of allegorical, like fantasy sort of world, is like a really good way to kind of force children to look at take what they're looking with fresh eyes and sort of see what it actually means. So there is actually, I think, a good kind of learning reason, or there's good motivations behind having really fantastical, weird creatures in our projects.
Yeah, we had there was some research that was being done, and we supplied a bunch of different character designs, like just on paper. And then we'd get back the research, and, you know, the ones that looked, it would be like, this is cute, you know, it looks friendly and happy. And then the ones that were a little bit, you know, more unusual, not related to something that exists in the world, the feedback would be like pages long, and they're really trying to suss out like what's its function, what does it do? And it was a really interesting discovery.
Even though all the kids preferred the cute ones, like they had way more to say about the kind of creepy, weird ones. So.
That's fascinating. I guess my milieu is all based in truth, and rather than the more imaginative aspects that you both lead, I guess it definitely comes from the act of reporting and seeking out characters who have interesting stories and interesting backstories. And I think about character for whether it's abstract or a film or a television spot or a graphic identity. Character ends up having to sit in scene. I always think about the components of place. What are the global forces, local forces that are affecting the decisions that character is making? How does that character relate to his or her circumstances? How do they overcome adversity? I think some of the most powerful stories really embrace adversity, because some of the most powerful stories are stories of people trying to do something and sometimes failing. And you have to have failure in order to understand success and contextualize success for whatever shape that takes. And sometimes it's just about useful information, about following your own curiosity. I think that was really one of the driving paths for us in making abstract, and that Morgan and Dave and I really were centered in the why. Why is this character choosing to make this decision, and why does that connect to the next decision that they'll make? And how do we seek to understand a common approach, and how do we solve bigger problems when we're able to come together in that kind of a framework? So character for me is everything, and we really, that's why we spent so much time talking to so many leaders to learn from them and to understand who the characters driving the creative conversation globally were. And all credit to Netflix for seeking to support that through the creation of the series. And it was just to be able to do that and to put character first, I think, was really at the heart of the response that we've gotten to the show.
It's great. Yeah. That's from fantastical characters and inspiring stories. Lately we seem to be so short on optimism and fun. And a lot of your work is fun and evokes this hope for a future. Is that part of the criteria for choosing the stories you want to tell? Or do you find the hope and joy in the story and shine a light on it?
I think we find, you can find, you know, hopefully hope and joy in everything. And yeah.
I think part of it is, you know, I think part of what I see our role as is, and Emily hates when I say this, but I kind of feel like, you know, we're sort of trying to do like research and development for like a more magical future, that like we literally want people to live in a more magical future. And so I kind of like to say that we're like the anti-DARPA. Like, you know, instead of like figuring out how we can use technology to like burrow down and kill people underground, like we're really just trying to like push the limits, but like in a way where you're like, you know, I remember when we did Funky Forest in the Netherlands, and for the very first time, like we stood back and we'd worked on this thing together, and we're like nonstop for 6 weeks, and we got to see kids play with it. And I just suddenly had this moment of realization that these kids now live in a world where, for them, the kids who've experienced this is normal. They're going to be like, oh yeah, I was just playing with this kind of magical forest where it was like, you know, I was like shaping it and I was kind of like bringing these creatures out. And for them, suddenly this is just normal. So when like they're growing up and they're thinking about like some fantastical idea, they're not thinking about, you know, a magical interactive forest. They're like, oh yeah, that's been done. You know, so just even the fact that we can kind of move the baseline forward to, so that just like, you know, and also at the same time sort of countering the fact that like so many huge corporations have such an impact on children's lives. And I feel like we need kind of more like independent designers and artists to be having an impact too. And so like, you know, without there being kind of any kind of deeper kind of motivation or long-term strategy, you know, like we want to kind of get kids away from their phones and their iPads and kind of get them to engage with, you know, in a really kind of positive, hopefully like a premonition of the future, of what, you know, the future could be. So I feel very passionate about this.
Well, as a parent, I want to thank you, parent of a 6-year-old, that I want to thank you for that and creating this beautiful world for him to take for granted as he's older. Yeah. I love that idea. And Scott, how about that joy? How do you find that? You've tackled some serious issues, from climate change to all over the place. Future of technology. How do you find that?
Joy, I think, is a common thread through the work that I've loved participating in. It was at Wired, joy in creation was just part of the process. It was a group of people who loved making magazines and who loved telling stories, and the coming together of that set of people and ideas every month was actually a celebratory process. So I think it definitely showed up in the love of craft and how we would engineer and design stories. I think we seek it out. There's a joy that comes from optimism, and I think most designers would probably raise their hand to identify as optimists, and we need that now. Now, more important than ever, there's the great Noam Chomsky quote that I'll butcher, but basically that optimists are responsible for creating the future, because if you're unwilling to believe that the future is going to be better, then you're unlikely to participate in making it. And I think that's part of it. That we got to work with the Nike team over the last couple of years on a project called Space Hippie, and the Space Hippie shoes, and telling the story of the Space Hippie creation. And that team had this wonderful mantra: if it's not fun, it's not Space Hippie. And even the name of there's joy in putting those two words together. It's just fun to say and fun to think about. And they really tried to engineer joy into their creative process. And so it's a natural outcome of that, I think, to build that into the storytelling mechanism, into the filmmaking process around telling that story. It's just a lot more fun to do it that way.
I have to say, I didn't realize you were involved in the Space Hippie shoe, and I kind of very casually keep an eye on sort of shoes, just kind of tangentially. And when I saw those come out, I was like, oh wow, Nike is finally having fun. And I was like going through, and I'm like, what happened? Like suddenly there was this whole period of very kind of conservative iterations on shoes. And then I was like, someone just like, they unleashed, they took the chains off someone, and they were just like, because the Space Hippie shoes and some of the other ones that have been coming out are like, they actually feel like kind of like prototype cars in a way, where you're like, they're actually selling this? Like, you know, it seems like they're just, in the last year, they're having just way more fun with their products.
They're an amazing bunch. I can claim no credit for the shoe, only for helping to tell the story. But the first time we saw it, we had the exact same reaction. This is just a joyful act, even to be able to think about this in a context that often is presented as so self-serious and earnest, and thinking about carbon capture and recycling. It's like, it's always a topic around eating your vegetables. as a thing you should do rather than a thing you want to do.
Right.
And they really flipped it on its head. I think that's part of the success of the initiative.
It's a wonderful story. So speaking of our current situation, as we all know, we're living in unprecedented times. We're seeing how the rapid spread of disinformation is creating division, confusion, and even has us some questioning our own reality. The stories that we share with our friends and pass down to the next generations and tell ourselves have such an important role in the perception of our individual and collective reality. As storytellers and leaders in your fields, how have these current times affected your work?
It's been tough. Theo, Emily, you want to go first?
I mean, we've definitely seen like, you know, some stuff slow down, but at the same time, we've also did something we didn't think was possible, which is a virtual installation. You know, normally we spend about 1 or 2 weeks with the computers, the hardware, the dialing all the software in on site. And so we were very hesitant to try and do something like that remotely. But you know, it just wasn't safe to travel during this period. And so we spent probably 4 times more in duration just because of how hard it is to sort of do that. But we accomplished a virtual installation. So that's, I think that's, you know, feels positive. I think like, you know, all these situations force you to adapt and pick up new skills and kind of do things that you didn't think were possible. And, you know, at the same time, I think a lot of museums, we're seeing this sort of like this two-headed approach. Like some museums are kind of just like, this, we'll be over this in a few weeks. Like we'll just keep everything as it is and we'll reopen. And others are like, well, actually, let's just commit to being shut down for a year or 6 months and really rethink the visitor experience. Like, do we want sort of screens everywhere? Do we want touch screens? Do we want people to be sort of like kind of using kind of like how are we going to kind of design for like a post-COVID world that still that kind of keeps a lot of fun and kind of innovation involved? And so I think there is a lot of people like reaching out and looking for kind of a new approach to sort of design for museum spaces.
Yeah, and spaces where people can still be together. It's not like everyone has to live in these isolated worlds. Like, yeah, what's a public collaborative spaces look like after this?
It's a good time to make stuff, at least.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I've been amazed at the resilience of my teammates. I have always come up, and from my earliest days of school, taught that design is a collaborative process. It's meant to be an in-person sport, and it's a team sport, and critique and feedback and ideation happens in an in-person kind of environment. So I've always existed in a workspace that looked like that, and that's been one of the key challenges, I think, and it's certainly how we've been building Godfrey Dadich Partners as a studio, that we love being together. We've spent so much time trying to design a culture around collaboration and creativity. So this was like the screeching on the brakes and hitting the wall when we all had to go into quarantine, and that it was painful in the extreme initially. I think what we've discovered, what so many of us have discovered, and I've learned from so many, even just to have conversations like this, that we can sort of break the space-time continuum and be together more frequently from different parts of the world simultaneously. That part's been amazing. And I've also been amazed to see some of the tools that have come up in this space, or the reuse of tools that were meant to be something else. We were lucky enough to redesign the ACLU magazine, and then to put together a magazine completely virtually, even have virtual photo shoots and sending cameras to our subjects to have them photograph themselves. All of that was so much fun to participate in, but even to think in new ways about what the magazine wall is. We have this concept in making magazines where you pin all the pages up on the wall and you walk by and work on it every day with an editor and an art director and a photo editor. You move pages around and you talk about things and you resequence and change colors and headlines. And we've actually been working on ways to do that virtually, that it's always on and always up and always current, that you could just log in from the browser using tools like Figma. So that part's been a lot of fun to play and stretch the boundaries of what our creative process looks like, what collaboration looks like. And I'm certain we're not done, and I'm certain it's going to continue to affect how we think about getting back in the studio together when we're able to.
Thank you. Well, speaking of the ACLU project, I'd like to talk about, as the pandemic persists, the injustices and inequalities in our society are being magnified. We're watching in real time how our systems are failing so many, especially the most vulnerable amongst us. As design leaders, how can we help eradicate the inequalities inherent in our industry? Whose story should we be hearing more of? What can we do? What can we do to help?
I think acknowledgement on the front end that we are part of the problem and that we can do better. We have a responsibility to include diverse voices in our educational systems, in our mentoring programs, in our hiring systems, in how we seek out talent and how we seek to collaborate. I think that's been at the center of the work that we're committing to, being transparent about not having done a good enough job in my career and seeking out counsel from Black leaders and people I admire and can learn from. That for me has been the start of it. I think the other side of it is acknowledging that this is work that will never be done, and that we need to tell the stories of those succeeding, and we need to highlight those successes and make sure that their stories are well told and that they're represented in the context of design at large and the fields that help shape the future of what this is going to look like for us all.
I think I would just also say that, echoing what Scott said, I'm not sure. We are I think we have we're a very small team, but we're kind of already, like, whenever we pull up our team picture and it's full white people, and I always cringe because I'm like, we really can do better. And, one of the things I think about is the pathways sort of we took to get into this field and to sort of get where we are. And, just what the kind of barrier and the cost of entry is to, kind of go to a school like Parsons, for a 4-year or a 2-year master's program. And, one of the things that I think is really positive that we're seeing is schools like the School for Poetic Computation in New York, I-Beam, the Gray Area, Foundation for the Arts in San Francisco, that are kind of doing kind of boot camps and kind of mini, kind of essentially functioning as like kind of mini schools, where in like 6 weeks with the School for Poetic Computation, you can kind of learn the basis of like a lot of the tools that we use for our projects, and also like even just kind of getting into the mindset of like how to think and approach this work, as well as sort of building kind of a kind of the network and connections that you would get normally at a design school. I think these things can be much more accessible to people, and I think on the other side, making sure that we can keep all these tools, that these open source tools, kind of going, making sure they're sustainable, because the work we do wouldn't exist if if it wasn't for the open frameworks community, processing community, these communities of people who donate tons of their time, and that again is sort of a position of privilege to be able to sort of keep these tools going. So I definitely, we're focusing a lot on the kind of education and like how the kind of career pathway and how do you get into this field.
I think also thinking about, choosing stories to elevate and in these kind of immersive interactive spaces, by actually having an experience, I feel like there's a greater sense of empathy that can be gained rather than just kind of imagining it. And I think, thinking more about that, I keep thinking of there was a research project in Stanford that they had it was a VR experience, which I kind of hate the goggles, but it was a narrative about homelessness, and that they actually found that people really were able to empathize with that, going through that experience. And then after the fact, they found that they were more driven to do something about it. So I think like thinking about ways to elevate stories that, people need to really understand, and then there might be more of a call to action to do something and really work toward change.
Absolutely. I love that piece that you're speaking of. And I love that you said that the kind of barrier of the VR. And I know that you take it out of that. And I'm wondering, what possibilities do you see taking shape in our not distant future with new technologies and new ways of storytelling? Like, that's a really great example, but love to keep going on that. Both of y'all.
Like, part of the issue with technology is I feel like we almost have too much of it right now. Like, things are moving really, really quickly. I saw in the chat someone was mentioning about like machine learning and kind of AI, and I think even that whole field, like I think we're just scratching the surface about how it will kind of impact design in all sorts of forms. And the thing I keep kind of saying is that if we had the technology we have right now, if we could just freeze development with it, the creativity that people could kind of put with just those tools would be huge. I feel like we could take what we have right now and do projects for 10 years without running out of without even kind of really hitting the limits of the technology. And so I think the danger is almost the opposite, which is that technology is moving so quickly that we're just kind of like fiddling with it a little bit before we put it down and pick up the next thing. And so I feel like we need to find a way to have space to dive deep on some of these things. Because I think we're kind of, to be honest, I think we're spoiled in terms of technology, and it's very easy just to sort of put one thing down and pick up the next thing and sort of just do a gimmick project and then kind of throw it away. And so VR is inherently problematic and for kind of a lot of different reasons.
I think our goal is always like to try to find ways to bring people together and have these shared collaborative experiences. And I think it'd be fun to think about what that looks like just in public space. And there could like a city could have its own story that's playing out, and that you get to like discover different parts of it as you just move around in the city throughout your day, or I don't know.
Yeah, I think like APIs for cities would be really fun. Kind of thinking of the city as a playground or as like a giant shared kind of interactive space. Yeah, I think VR is very much like, it's like the audiophile, hi-fi setup where you're playing like the perfect vinyl on the perfect record, with the perfect speakers. It's like a wonderful experience, but there's a reason that like MP3s are, and like streaming audio is like how 98% of people listen to music now. It's kind of convenient. And so I feel like VR is not the convenient technology.
Well, in the equity issue with it.
Right.
Not cheap. And yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that insight in future predictions. Scott, what about modern technology excites you the most? I just think of like, can you imagine if we're all living in quarantine without the ability to connect digitally? Like, just that. Like, what are your predictions or?
It would be ugly. It would be really tough. I think about the technologies that have enabled radical shifts in how my career has shaped out, and the access to teachers and opportunities that have shifted. I got into magazines just as Corp Express was replacing actual paste up. And my mentors at the magazine had these piles of boards that was literally paste up and glue and X-Acto knives to create layouts for a magazine. So I was a huge beneficiary right at the front end of my career. It happened again with the move to touch computing and tablet and phone as a primary storytelling vehicle, the rise of HTML5 and the power that gave us over the fidelity of a storytelling experience in a browser on a touchscreen device. into what streaming has created for us, and the fact that we can shoot these beautiful images on high fidelity cameras in 4K and now in 8K, and then stream these stories to literally hundreds of millions of people around the world. It's kind of breathtaking to take it all in, and even just to talk about it in that sequence. And technology's always been such an energizing factor for me personally, from my interest, whether as a young man or as a journalist or someone who's benefited from it. I think I know where some of this leads, but as soon as you believe that, then you're going to be proven wrong. And I'm eager for it to continue to be democratized. And I think that's a great point, Emily and Theo, about getting spoiled and always seeking the new. Sometimes we ought to just do a better job of making sure that everyone has access to what we all have today, rather than rushing on to the next thing. And access to computing and to education, the democratization of artificial intelligence feels really crucially important right now, given how rapidly these dynamics are reshaping culture and society. I think we all as designers have a great obligation to make sure that we're driving equity in those discoveries and in the sharing of those tools.
Absolutely. I'd love to dig more into that too. It's like, will technology save us or destroy us? And as designers that are working in it and potentially creating it, how do we ensure that it evolves to do more good than harm? And
I would actually just say to that point, like, we all can actually change that. We can make an impact. And when Emily and I started first doing these projects, like, there wasn't really even a field. You wouldn't say, it was very hard to describe this field. And I think, between kind of working on tools like open frameworks, which kind of makes, this stuff accessible to everyone. When we started out, there was Flash, there was Director, and the things we wanted to do, you couldn't do with Flash or Director. Like, we kind of kept hitting those limits. And so we literally kind of created our own tools in order to make the work we want to make. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you don't have to go that far. You can make new tools to allow people to make new work. But you can also kind of create new fields. You can create new kind of art forms and kind of fields of design. And you can sort of shift the trajectory of things. Just by sometimes just a kind of a viral YouTube video of a proof of concept. So I feel like it's not hopeless, and I feel like designers especially have a responsibility to sort of push things in the direction they want it to go.
I've had the same experience, especially working on what became the Wired and iPad apps, Wired and New Yorker apps. And those literally just started with a very small idea, and there weren't any of the tools, and the software didn't exist. And it was a series of what if questions, and between myself and a couple other designers and editors, and what if we could do this, and what if we could do that? And you seeking to ask the right questions, I think, ends up being really critical part of that. But you're exactly right, Theo. You can shift the dynamics of the conversation and the nature of it very effectively, especially given today's access to social media and video platforms. The dissemination of ideas the cost has gone to zero effectively.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Just kind of building on the responsibility conversation. So in preparation for this event, I dug into a few of Ellen Lupton's lectures discussing her book, Design is Storytelling. The book is fantastic. I recommend you all read it at home. And she's always very entertaining. I love watching her talks. And at one of her talks for her book tour, she was discussing the book and how storytelling is likened to creating a path and user journey. And she went on to say this quote: "We as designers create opportunities for freedom or control. This points to an ethical dilemma in everything we do. To what degree are we offering infinite choice and possible confusion? And to what degree are we creating a fixed path?" That's Ellen Lupton. And that idea has really resonated with me. And lately it's got me examining and questioning the communication that I consume. And when I'm looking at something, is the main intent of this piece to inform, or is it to persuade, or is it both? And I've just been thinking on this, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this kind of concept.
I don't know. I know we were just discussing this earlier, and we said that we don't really like to persuade. We more lean towards inform, or essentially to put the information out there and kind of let people kind of approach it at their own pace and in a way that they can relate to.
I think just find like being intrinsically motivated to follow your curiosities, it's so much more impactful and rewarding than, you know, being told what to do, and also like having space to kind of move it, you know, your own pace with your own abilities, and where it's, you know, it's more individualized.
I think a lot of it really depends on the content and the subject. You know, I think there are some things that kind of, in terms of like storytelling and narrative, that work better kind of linearly and kind of from A to B. We did this project where it was an audio documentary for the iPad. It's the John Lennon Bermuda tapes. And they had 40 to 60 minutes of audio content, but there was almost no visuals. And so we were sort of tasked with kind of making an interactive app that would allow them to tell the story like a documentary. And I think probably for about half of the development time, we were kind of butting up against this like fixed narrative where we're like, you know, it's got to be interactive storytelling. We want people to sort of, you know, approach it completely in their own way.
Like let go of control.
But then we kind of kept getting kind of beaten up by this like very long audio narrative. And then we, you know, the more we thought about it, we were like, this is actually a very linear story. Like, you know, he gets on the boat in the US, he sails to Bermuda, he almost kind of crashes in the storm. He gets, you know, it's a very linear thing. And then we realized, like, in this case, interactivity doesn't have to be the star of the show. It can just support this kind of very linear narrative. And so once we realized that, you know, narrative was leading and we were following, we could have a lot more fun with it. And we could, like, you know, let people illustrate and like play with the story as they're going. But that was a hard lesson. And, you know, we learned that, like, you can't really have interactivity and narrative with the same weight. One has to lead and the other has to follow. And those don't, and that really depends on the story and the context.
Mm.
I think you did a fantastic job with that, and it is a beautiful piece, and the balance is perfect. And yeah,
but it was a lot of struggle.
Worked.
Yes.
I see them as opposite positives in a way. As an author of stories and designs, I understand that I bring a personal worldview or an aesthetic worldview to the work. And in a magazine background, we're taught that there's the front of the book and the middle of the book and the feature well and the cover and all the things that exist in some linear order. And we actually spend a ton of time thinking about that sequence and which stories slot in and which positions, how big are they, at what scale are we going to tell the story. And that's that reason for that digital wall and why we shift things back and forth. And when you get a magazine, you realize that people don't consume it in that way. They flip to the back or they open the back cover first, and you actually have no agency over how the reader is going to consume it. And that's consistent with a streaming platform. You know, we've spent a lot of time talking about in what order the episodes of Abstract ought to occur. And guess what? People go hunt and peck around and pick out the stories that they want to see first. And it actually doesn't matter in the way that we thought it would. So there are moments when we need the guiding hand of the editor or of the creator to help us contextualize and understand the intent of the story. And that sometimes the beginning, middle, and end is actually the point of the thing. And we also, I think, need to embrace that as tools change and as consumption habits change and audiences have different needs, that we really need to relax that control instinct and sort of back off a little bit and allow people to consume works in the way that your beautiful creations are consumed in a much more fluid and dynamic way. And it's always a good lesson for me to experience a work like one of yours.
Thanks.
So we're almost done with this part, and then we're going to open up to Q&A. But I have one last question. What are y'all working on now that you can share with us? I know there's probably a lot of NDAs and secret things, but I know Scott might have just released something this week.
We had some cool news this morning. You're right, Michael. We have projects that span years sometimes in time frames. Abstract took a few years before we were even able to talk about it, but some of the smaller projects are just as important. And we were lucky enough to partner with Molly Stern, the legendary book publisher. She is Michelle Obama's editor, and published Becoming just last year as the best-selling memoir of all time. Molly was at Crown for a number of years and has just launched her new publishing imprint called Zando today. So there's a nice piece in the Times about Molly and the work that she's going to be doing. And we were lucky enough to design her visual identity and the colophon for the publishing house. So that's something that's out today. You can go see it at zandoprojects.com. I feel like a talk show plugging the latest.
Yeah.
Beautiful logo. I checked it out when you chatted it to us earlier, and wow, I love for me, logos always the best logos tell a story of what it is, and I feel like you did a great job with that brand.
Molly is a visionary, so it was easy to say yes to partnering with her, and the team was so excited to join the Zando group.
Well, I'm digging into that New York Times article. Thank you. Design.io, do you have any non-secrets you could share? Hot gossip of your new work?
Sure. We're close to wrapping up a project, a new installation for the Tech Museum in San Jose, all about the future of sustainability, where visitors can adjust different parameters based on infrastructure and transport and energy generation and food production and water management, and then sort of see what the kind of unintended consequences and trade-offs that happen. Everything has its pros and cons.
It's sort of like a reverse sim earth, where instead of working at the tiny level and kind of putting things here and there, you're thinking about it kind of parametrically, and then the world sort of reconfigures based on your desired goals. And then you see, oh, actually, all the solar panels have taken up all the forests, and you're like, I didn't think about that. And so yeah, that's probably one of the more kind of info and data kind of centric projects we've done. And we're also working on a couple of projects that we can't really talk about, but are I think kind of pushing our kind of abilities a little bit. Like we try and always, if we do too many things that feel easy or comfortable, we try and give ourselves a couple of impossible tasks to achieve on each project. And so we have that lined up with we have a very like a 360 immersive space that we're working on, that we're going to think about time of day and weather and like really dynamic and emergent, bringing in kind of more emergent aspects to it. So like what if connected worlds look completely different each time because of things like erosion and kind of weather, and so kind of over very long time scales, and also working on some updates to our video games. So because games are really almost they're not finished when you release them. That's almost the point where they start, which we're learning now. And so we want to add a whole bunch of features over the coming year to make it more accessible.
Fantastic. Well, you might not know this, but will we be able to go to the museum in real IRL?
I think in the spring of 2021 is their opening plan at the moment, I believe.
Yeah, I think the same in Connected Worlds will be reopening, and eyesight will be reopening in in the spring of 2021 as well. But this is all TBD, I guess.
Keep wearing our masks. Keep
Yeah.
distancing. Before we jump into the Q&A, I know that everyone's dying to ask you, Scott, season 3 abstract.
I really hope we can get back to production soon. It's we were in talks about who might factor into that season when COVID hit, and like I said, it takes about 300 people, and we shoot in almost 20 cities every season. So it's a lot of airplanes, a lot of travel, and a lot of people. So we're trying to figure out how that looks and how we can get back. But if you want to add your voice, please share with Netflix that you'd like to see it back, and all of your feedback and views really count. So we're really so appreciative for the love that the community's shown us and how much people are sharing.
Just play it in the background while you work all day.
Yeah, just run it. And my wife might leave me if that's the case. But she's got enough abstract in her life.
Oh, I meant for all of us at home.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure. All right, I'm going to jump into Q&A from all you. This is usually the part where I get to take a back seat, but you're stuck listening to my voice ask your questions. So I'm just going to go through the Q&A here, and we'll try to get through as many as we can in the next 20 minutes. I'll just go in order. Ruby Strickland asked this right out the gates. For Design.io, do you ever involve children in your design processes? If so, how would you recommend connecting with clientele not typically represented in design, whether due to age or other factors? So, like inclusive design, do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we first started, there was a little bit of arrogance, like, oh, we know how kids are going to use something, and very quickly you run into issues. And so there was a point where Emily and I would be on our knees with our kind of arms folded like this, trying to make trees kind of in this, to simulate someone who's 4 or 5. But now we literally just kind of build that into our development process, and we do a lot of different testing.
Yeah, prototypes and testing with children. And we've been lucky with like NICI, for example, will bring in all different groups, different age ranges, people with different abilities. And so we have that built into our production processes as testing, and then it informs changes that we'll make as we continue through the final.
And like some of the things that we can do kind of from a accessibility standpoint is, a lot of times we kind of had this model of like, first we try and find the person, and then we try and find the hands, and then we try and find the head. Head and then hands. And with connected worlds, we realized that that might be difficult if someone's in a wheelchair, or if 2 people are standing close together, we might not recognize them as people. So we decided just to write an algorithm that looked for hands. And so it doesn't matter if Emily and I are shoulder to shoulder and we're both holding out our hands and we have 4 hands out, or if someone's in a wheelchair and they don't look like what we would analyze as a sort of person shape from above. And so, some of the things we can do are, kind of, instead of trying to be smart, like kind of be dumb in a way where we just sort of simplify it down to things that just
the
accessible.
Information we need. Yeah.
But yes, the answer is yes. And yeah, we love doing it. We're always terrified to do it. And teenagers are definitely the scariest age group.
That's fantastic. That approach reminds me of some of the stories that Kat Holmes tells in her new book, Mismatch.
I haven't read that, but that was my favorite abstract episode.
Oh, Kat Holmes?
Yeah.
Oh, Kat Holmes, different Kat.
Oh, sorry.
That was one of my favorite episodes too. She is amazing. But Kat Holmes is Mismatch is about accessibility, and I recommend it to everyone. But it's very much that line of thinking.
I'll have to read that.
Sorry, it's not my turn to talk anymore. I'll go to another question from the audience. Scott, Maria Etkind, sorry if I butchered the name. Maria asked, how did you learn how to direct a TV show? Is it similar to a publication design, and how did it prepare you to direct?
Great question. I studied film and television in school. I directed my first television commercial when I was 20, when I was working at the communications firm in Lubbock in West Texas. So that was a thrill. But it's a great point that actually magazine making really did prepare me in a pretty significant way in terms of what's involved, and that is research, tons and tons of reading, interviews, reporting, understanding the context that you're situating the character within, the aesthetic components that really have been supported by a background in photography and graphic design, and understanding how dynamic compositions come together. And then the additional component in film is that sense of time, that you are moving a camera from A to B through a time scale. So all of that factors. The best answer though is learning at the feet of the master. Morgan Neville is probably one of the greatest working documentarians today, and I got to travel with him and follow his process and learn at his feet. And he's just an incredibly generous, collaborative partner, and really sought to support my growth there and support me in directing. And I owe so much to him and to the other directors as part of Abstract. I've learned from each of them. Chai Buzzer-Helly, who just won the Oscar for Free Solo, as part of the Abstract family. Brian Oakes, just a really intense and wonderful group of people. And we've all sort of shared our backgrounds, and I benefited so much from being a part of that cohort.
I'm going to go out of chronological order because I think this ties in nicely. So Jeff Durkin asked you, Scott, I'd like to hear about interviewing designers. How do you prepare? How do you dig deeper to extract those nuggets of information while keeping it emotional and authentic? Love the work, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. That's an awesome question. First and foremost, I just try to bring a sense of genuine curiosity, to put myself in the shoes of an audience member or of someone who needs to or wants to understand the story that we're going to tell through that interview. But it also starts with research again, reading. If the designer has writings or blog posts or a social media account, I go back and really try to scour their work and their writings about their work, or their lectures, whether on YouTube or other. And so often they're just blinding insights that they've shared. And so I want to go in and unpack that. Where did that come from? Where did you start thinking about that? A good example would be Ian Spalter and his musings on the overlap between stand-up comedy and UX design and design generally, which is just like the two nodes that I never would connect, and yet Ian had done that. So he has some great lectures about that, and I would watch those, and then we get back together and I'd really try to understand where that came from and how his own work experience yielded those insights. So it's mostly those on the front end, but then the active interviewing of sitting down with someone, for me, the biggest piece is just to listen. And you'll bring a whole sheet of questions and you can have pages and pages of questions, but the best interviews end up just being a conversation and really being well informed such that you can dart around and flip to the back of your list of questions or throw them out completely and just follow the line of curiosity. I think the most human conversations end up making the most impactful interviews. And one of the tricks of Abstract is actually that a lot of the narration that you hear in the show happens in very early interviews that are audio only, that we'll even just do by phone, or not even bring a camera to, and just have a dialogue, because the camera adds a lot of pressure into those environments. And for folks who aren't used to being in front of a camera, they can clench up and it can be very stressful. So we really want to de-stress that environment. And then we use that audio to pair with visuals and later interviews that we do on camera.
Yeah.
I mean, you capture so many amazing moments. One of my favorites is that the Paul Scher, the arc of a meeting. I try to use that every time I'm in a meeting. So,
Get out while you still can.
Get out while you
the meeting. End the meeting.
so good. Pearl G writes for Design.io, you're totally bursting my brain. Are you or others looking for ways to educate children remotely? Consider the isolation, COVID. Education has got to move forward from the 20C pedagogy, has to move forward. Hope you're part of that transformation. And I second that, having kindergarten.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Just totally rethinking how people learn, so it just is a more natural way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of COVID situation is a pretty challenging one for, I think teachers are really struggling to figure out how to make it work. And I think that there have been some good strategies. Sort of even pre-COVID, we were thinking, we're always trying to move out of our comfort zones. And so we were thinking a little bit about kind of tools that we could provide that would connect to kind of open access collections. Like, you know, for example, like Cleveland Museum of Art hasn't kind of open, all of their work is available both in 3D scan formats and high resolution. And like Google Arts and Culture has done a ton to like make all these different museums accessible. So we were thinking like, how could we kind of, what sort of like, could we have a little box that you kind of pull, you know, you pull open and you have this sort of really kind of cutting edge interactive kit that like any classroom in America could kind of immersively explore and kind of look at details within artworks. One of the things we had at that we made for the Cleveland Museum of Art was this wall called Zoom. And it was just like the simplest idea. We did the prototype in like half a day, but it was a high resolution video wall and your body was a giant magnifying glass. And it would go through different artworks in their collection and you just could zoom in with your body to see tiny little details. And even if you'd seen the work on the walls of the museum, you know, it might be a drawing that's like this. At that scale, and then zooming in with your body, you can actually like see that there's a person sketched in the window that you didn't even realize, you know, in the original artwork. And so kind of, you know, we really enjoyed that challenge of getting children and families to connect and engage with artworks in a way that was kind of related to them. And so I think we really would love to explore like tools for art, but also maybe other kind of subjects, kind of thinking about more playful ways we can engage remotely with content as well as with each other.
I think it'd be fun to try to think about designing a at-home learning curriculum for kids that isn't just them like sitting in front of, you know, a Zoom class, but, you know, I think that would be such a blast.
Or even, you know, maybe building multiplayer games where, you know, you sort of frame it as a game, but they're solving problems, they're working together.
But then you have to go outside and collect something physical and add that in, like.
Yeah, like real world collage.
Yeah.
Keep going, please. Parents are praying.
There's a lot of possibility, I think, for sure. Yeah.
I'm gonna try to tie one in for you that I see in here. So Design.io from Alexandros Cosmides, hope I said that right. Alexandros says, I love the purpose of making the world more magical. Speaking of magic, have you tinkered with a Magic Leap device as a tool to bring to life your experiences and stories in mixed reality? Perhaps even a new way to overcome that physical and spatial boundaries. I don't know what that is.
So the Magic Leap is kind of like, you know, a VR headset, but where you can see through into the world around you. And so mixed reality is sort of it's like augmented reality, but it's looking through some sort of camera or lens and seeing kind of virtual content. I'm more optimistic about mixed reality, I think, than pure VR, because I think it doesn't sort of remove you from the world as much. I'm not sure if Magic Leap, we toyed with the idea of it, and then it was one of those things where you have to kind of plonk down a whole bunch of money for this very proprietary device. And not to be mean, but I didn't really see it getting kind of adapted into the mainstream. I know Apple's been working on something for a while, and I can imagine that if anyone's going to do it, they might be the ones to really pull it off. I think from an educational perspective, there could be a lot of interesting things there. And I would love to make some sort of like a connected worlds at home that sort of lived on your dining table. But again, it's still a little clunky. Like if anyone, holding up an iPad at a certain angle, and these are, they're, I don't know, they're not perfect solutions yet.
True. I wonder though, like if that just becomes so standard, because again, my kindergartner, he's on his iPad all day, and that's one of the things he has to take pictures of his like learning to write letters, and it's kind of like he's just used to doing that now. Than I am, and I don't know. It's interesting.
But there is just in terms of like physical digital, there is something so magical feeling of like combining actual physical objects with these kind of digital experiences. Like we had one when we were testing like collecting garbage. So there was projected like a trash heap, and you would kind of have this physical trash garbage truck that you would put to the wall, and you'd see the garbage go into it, and like pulling that off the wall and like feeling like you're actually holding something in your hand. There's something really great about that, just in terms of magic feeling.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be screen based necessarily. It could be audio based too. There could be a lot of interesting things there.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's exciting to see. So this question's for Scott, but I would love to open this up for all of us to answer, because I think it's a really fun question. If you could profile anyone from any time period on Abstract, dead or alive, who would be your bucket list designers to meet and create an episode about?
Massimo Vignelli.
Nice. Design. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Top of the list.
Sister Coretta Kent.
I'm trying to think. I mean, Charles and Ray Eames would be wonderful, just because I find their work fascinating. And there's a kind of fairly obscure Japanese designer and educator, and I think his name is Sato, yeah. And he does the most amazing explanations of algorithms, kind of complex math problems. I think he was behind the invention of the algorithm dance, which was an actual dance that you do where the person behind you does the thing you did, but one step behind, and the whole thing fits together perfectly because of the movements are all designed to work with an offset of one. And he does these beautiful animations, like showing like the way a ballerina is or a dancer is moving and how it kind of relates to different mathematical kind of line drawings. And I think he would be really interesting.
I think Jim Henson, just because I feel like he's such a like force of good in this world, and I've read of people who worked with him saying how just the way that he worked made you want to work that much harder, and really he knew how to like bring out the best in people. And I think like having that abstract eye on his working process would have just been the best.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Oh, I could play this game all day. Is in Japan, you got me thinking of Kenya Hara. I had the pleasure of hosting a lecture with him, and he's like the Yoda of design. It's just so amazing. He'd be a fantastic episode. But since we could play this all day, we should probably move on. But a similar question is, someone asked, and I'll find out who did that. Oh, Tina Hong Sandmel, do you have mentors? And if so, how did you find one?
Yes. Dozens of them. You guys want to go first?
No, definitely go for it.
Sonia Yek was one of my first mentors, the woman who found me working in the bagel shop, and just the most generous soul, generous designer. Evan Smith of Texas Monthly, my first editor-in-chief to work for. a gentleman named Bernard Tyson, who passed away last year. He was the chairman and CEO of Kaiser Permanente. I had the great fortune of getting to meet him many years ago at a business conference, and we became friends, and he agreed to be my mentor and just taught me so much about leadership and listening to people and leading with courage and empathy. And I think about him almost every day. In terms of how you find one, I've always had great luck just asking people. And I've had people ask me. I think it's a wonderful practice. It's a way to give back and to share beliefs and backgrounds. And I found that almost everyone is enormously generous when asked to lend a hand and thinking about how they can share their experiences, especially with folks who are coming up. So I've always had great luck just sending an inquiry out or asking in person.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I mean, my story was a little bit roundabout because I was at Parsons because I was about to do, an interview for the photography department. And I ended up sort of seeing in the catalog that they had just started this design technology program. And I kind of bailed out of my photography interview and kind of just started knocking on doors and ended up finding the head of the design technology program and sort of doing an ad hoc interview that way. And the program was, it was pretty scrappy, and it was not really, I think it wasn't even accredited when I joined. So they told us by the time we graduate, it would be accredited, which was pretty scary. But I was lucky enough to have Zach Lieberman there, who himself had come through the program under Golan Levin, and Golan Levin had studied with John Maeda at MIT, and with Ben Fry and Casey Reese, who created processing. And so, it was sort of through the generosity of Golan sharing his kind of work and his teaching with Zach, and then Zach sharing it with me, that I kind of got to, I think I got a kind of preview or very early access into this field. And so, part of the Open Frameworks project that Zach and I created is sort of taking these tools that were kind of private, kind of hand-me-down tools from MIT and making them open source and really making them much more accessible to kind of a wider group of people.
What about you, Michael?
Oh, I have a few mentors, and they're just every day. Actually, I've been trying to go for walks with them now, socially distant walks, so we can just, and in these kind of tough times, the studio's struggling a bit. It's like so helpful just to have people who have gone through hard times and faced adversity and gotten through it and have great advice. I try to be a mentor to many. I don't know many students want that, but whenever someone reaches out, I'm definitely all for it. I love it. I have a regular Zoom date with someone now that's just getting into design, and I love that. And one of the questions actually tied to that, Jordan Douglas has a non-traditional background in tech and design, and they often struggle with imposter syndrome and doubting their abilities due to their experience level. How did you all come your moments of doubt throughout this journey? And I think mentorship's one of those ways, but some others.
Absolutely. I deal with imposter syndrome every day. Like being on this call feels like part of that experience. I think it's something we all would struggle with and do struggle with, but I've always just benefited from coaching like that can come from a mentor, and also just putting your head down and doing the work. Whenever I've doubted my ability to solve a problem, it's invariably that feeling goes away with hard work and putting your nose to the grindstone. That's just been my experience, at least.
I feel like if you're following something that you're interested in or passionate about or curious, like there's no imposter syndrome.
I would say that, one lesson I learned early on was, put the work that you want to be doing front and center in your portfolio. And, even maybe to the point of hiding the work you don't want to do, even if you're capable of it. because very much that your clients, the kind of projects that people kind of reach out to you, they end up defining your kind of path. And so we're constantly having to we find ourselves kind of getting pulled in a direction where we're kind of building, someone's asking us to build like a kiosk at a train station or something, and then we're like, wait a minute, this isn't why we started doing this stuff. And you're almost constantly having to reset. So don't be afraid to say no to things that feel like they're not going to help you get to where you want to get to.
That is fantastic advice. And I think sometimes those go hand in hand with the imposter syndrome. You start to be like, yeah, I'll do it. I can do it. So, learning to pause and say no is a good skill.
There are a lot of people who have the opposite problem, which is like they think they're way too confident, and those people end up doing really well. So sometimes I remember a good friend of mine, he was like, oh, I just got this After Effects job, and I'm like, do you know After Effects? And he's like, no, but it starts in 2 months, I'll figure it out by then. And I was like, well, in one respect, I'm like, that's a little disingenuous, but then that's kind of, no one ever feels comfortable. Just like you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you should just go for it. That's how we all learn. We're all learning every day. Still.
That's great advice, too.
Get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. Is that what the quote was? Yeah. It's so true. All right, y'all. I think it's the end of this, and I just really want to thank you all. I really want to congratulate you all for receiving the National Design Award. It is very much deserved, as we can tell. It was such an honor when our studio received it, and I can honestly say it changed my life, and I think it will yours as well. Yeah, it was really great getting to know you, and I hope we all get to connect again. And yeah, thank you, and thank you all, everyone at home. And thanks to Cooper Hewitt, and everybody, keep celebrating Design Month. It's still the rest of the month, and Cooper Hewitt's got some awesome stuff planned. So yeah, thank you all. And I really wish we could all just like mix and mingle in the audience right now, but we'll all go to our own rooms. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. And there are a lot of questions, so please email us if we can help in any way.
Likewise.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.